right. So it is 1:15. We may have a few folks join. My guessing is over the next few minutes, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So we have a intimate group for this session. So before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and at the very least share my screen so that you can see the slides. So welcome to From My Story to Their Story, using our stories to help others share theirs. So I'd love to, because we have a small group, actually go around and really quickly just introduce ourselves, just who you are and what interested you in the session, and we'll go ahead and take it from there. But this workshop is really meant to be participatory, and so I think going around and maybe just hearing quickly from each person would be a great way to start. So I'm just going to go down the line as I see it on the participants list. And Sheila, if you would go ahead and just introduce yourself briefly.
Okay, I'm Sheila, and I've lived all my 83 years in Rochester. I grew up on Joseph Avenue, and my friends are from all different walks of life and different races and different religions. I had the disadvantage of not seeing anything before this because at 83, I just couldn't get in. I tried everything I knew, but so I'm looking forward to talking with all of you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sheila. Alexis, go for it.
Hey everyone, my name is Alexis Stubbe. I'm a teacher, a sixth grade teacher at the Genesee Community Charter School in Rochester. Sheila was born and raised in Rochester and have been here for all my 43 years, a little moving around for a while. But I do this work with my students, with sixth grade students. We spend a lot of time in building curriculum that allows kids to share their stories and the kind of the quest to make connections, to develop empathy and to explore identity. So this is hopefully an exercise, and just I'm hoping to get something from this that I can bring to the classroom and work in my own relationships too with colleagues and friends. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Alexis. Debbie Rosenfeld.
Hi, I'm Debbie. I am a children's writer, and I'm just interested in understanding and in stories, and I thought it would be interesting to hear what you were going to talk about today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Debbie. Jane Amsty.
Hi, folks. I'm also originally from Rochester, but went to high school in California and University on Long Island, and then ended up back here. My interest is, I've had a long-standing interest in storytelling and living archives and how to utilize a story for individual stories for current and history and whose history. So I think that the power of storytelling is really important from generation to generation, but also as a living archive and documents. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane. Jocelyn, and then Daphne, and then I'll get started. Jocelyn, go for it. Can you hear me, Jocelyn? I think you are muted.
Sorry,
Yep,
now I'm unmuted. Okay, sorry. So my work is market research, and I spend my life finding the stories that the data is telling us. And the data and the findings and the open-ended and the closed-ended questions are all about stories that are shared, pooled, put together, analyzed, and then insights are drawn. So my life is very much about listening to stories, asking the right questions and listening to hear what stories emerge.
Fantastic. And Daphne, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and your interest in the workshop, and then I'll kick things off.
Hi, hi, my name is Daphne Futterman, and I'm just, I don't know, the workshop just seemed interesting to me. I mean, and I'm very much interested in hearing the whole summit to end hate and the message from start to finish is just something that I'm very passionate about. So
Fantastic. Well, let me go ahead and share my screen and introduce myself more formally. So I am Zack Ellis, and also a Rochester native, as many of you mentioned that you are. And I like to say that the longest single-threaded thing in my life that's helped to shape who I am outside of family is wrestling. And so I started wrestling since I was about yay high, if you're looking at the bottom of your screen, to the top, and through college. And it was one of my college wrestling teammates who recruited me to go work with him out in San Francisco. And so I spent 6 years on the West Coast in various technology startups before coming back to Rochester about 2 years ago to start my own company, Their Story. And Their Story, in brief, is a interviewing and storytelling platform used by cultural heritage institutions like the Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and the Peace Corps, all to streamline the process of recording oral histories with individuals in each of those communities. And our workshop today, however, is going to be less about their story or even technology at all, and really more so about the process of self-reflection and using self-reflection to come up with questions to elicit stories from others. And in particular, we'll go through a process that I personally used to document the life stories of my own parents, and even to share things with them that I had never shared with them before. So how we're gonna go about doing that is that first I'll share a little bit about, I'm 30 now, but why in my early 20s, why did I get interested in my own parents' stories and in their story, in the business of oral history. We'll do some short reflection on that, and then actually go into taking a chance. It'll be more like a working session, if you will, of reflecting on some moments in your own lives that you might be able to use to come up with questions to elicit stories from others, whether it's family members, friends, colleagues, students, as Alexis may have said. So at the end, you're going to come away with your own set of questions that you can use, and you'll actually have the chance at the end of today's session to explore one prompt that you've come up with yourself with someone else in today's session. So what prompted me to document my parents' stories? And in particular, it was at my uncle's funeral that my dad had told me one of his biggest regrets in life was not recording his father's stories before he died. And I had known that for a while, but hadn't done anything about it until one day. I was in Amsterdam, in the Anne Frank house, in the attic, and there was an oral history, a video playing of Anne's father, Otto, talking about how he had never realized the depth and complexity of Anne's thoughts. And this video really moved me. And instead of kind of sharing just my main takeaway from it and what it was that moved me, I'll actually play the video itself, or a short snippet from it that I saw that day. And so you'll hear Otto say at the very beginning, it took him a while to read it, and he means Anne's diary.
It took me a very long time to read it. And I must say, I was very much surprised about deep thoughts Anna had. Her seriousness, especially her self-criticism. It was quite a different Anna I had known as my daughter. She never really showed this kind of inner feeling. She talked about many things, we criticized many things, but what really their feelings were, I only could see from the diary. And my conclusion is, as I had been in very, very good terms with Anna, that most parents don't know really their children.
So a heavy sentiment. And before I share kind of my main takeaway from it, I'm curious to hear maybe from one or two of you, what your thoughts or feelings were as you were hearing Otto's words.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to get to spend the last 4.5 years of my mom's life with her. I moved her up here to Rochester, where she lived at the Highlands at Pittsford, and I would see her virtually every day for those 4.5 years. And I had the insight and the wisdom. I'm not sure she knew me quite as well, but I certainly got to know her very well before she died. My sister, who lives out in California, would call every few weeks and say, so how's it going? And was very much peripheral to the process. And in the course of my taking care of Mom, there was a lot more work that I had to be doing. And for every moment that I felt put upon, I also felt lucky because I was getting to hear their stories. I was really getting to know the person. And I was getting to know her as adult to adult, not, the last time any of us lived at home together, we were teenagers. And so it was a whole different kind of storytelling and listening. Some of the most interesting stuff happened when she was less lucid towards the end and was a little more confused, but boy, did I get to hear about the olden days.
Yeah, so an opportunity in your mom's last few years to be able to connect in a way that you hadn't before, adult to adult. Yeah. Curious, thank you, Jocelyn. Other thoughts or things that were kind of stirred up for anyone else?
Yeah, as a senior citizen, I'm told over and over and over again that it's important to tell our stories. And as a matter of fact, my brother got a wonderful Father's Day gift, something called Storyworth, where they ask a question every week. And I thought I knew my brother, but boy, I had no idea of some of the things that he experienced. So the questions are really important. They're questions that usually don't think about. I had a wonderful opportunity to know my late husband, who was a Holocaust survivor, because he spoke everywhere. He wanted his story to be known. He wanted to know that good people could help. And now, since he passed away, I'm having the opportunity to speak to many groups about his story. And one day my daughter said to me, "You're always telling Dad's story. What about your own?" So as I heard him say, I thought I knew her. We had many conversations, but I guess we never really know anybody all the way. I mean, so I'm looking forward to the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great gift to get to know your brother more, and also to speak about your husband, and now even reflecting a little more on your own life. Yeah, and I think that notion of what you just said of, we really don't know each other was something that struck me with Otto's words, and in particular, his saying that despite his close relationship with Anne and the fact that he never really knew she was, that most parents don't know their kids, just made me think, well, if most parents don't know their kids, then how could I possibly know who my parents are? And so that was when I decided that I was going to start the process of recording my parents telling their life stories, and my sharing things with them, as I said before, that I had never shared with them. And the problem was, at the time I was living in San Francisco, they were here in Rochester, New York. And so about every other week for about 2 years, we would hop on a FaceTime call. This was before their story existed. And I would record the call from my computer and learn just enough web development to build a private website to host those recordings for my family. And there were two main things that were valuable from that. One is that we had a private space online that we could easily access these invaluable conversations now and for future generations, but potentially more importantly was just the process itself of self-reflection and engaging in these dialogues deepened our relationships, built trust, and improved our capacity for better communication thereafter. And that really was the genesis of their story. And when I thought to myself, well, what would it look like to recreate this experience for other people in a way that's relevant and meaningful to them? The challenge for me, though, was, as you were alluding to, Sheila, is, well, what do I ask? How do I even start the conversation? And so for me, the first thing that I did, also because I promised myself that I was going to be a part of sharing, was to write down meaningful moments in my own life that I wanted to make sure that I shared with them. And so what we're going to do in just a moment here is take about 2 minutes to start to write down just a few moments, not the whole story, but some keywords that'll jog your memory about key moments in your own life that you would want to share, whether it's with a spouse, a parent, a child, grandchild, family member, friend. And to give an example of what I mean by a meaningful moment, I'll share one of my own. But go ahead, and if you want to start writing, go for it. But what I mean by that, a meaningful moment, I mentioned that wrestling had been one of the things that has really shaped who I am. In my sophomore year of high school, I had taken second in New York State in wrestling, and that had opened up a world of opportunities to me in terms of working with new training partners. And I'll never forget, I was invited to wrestle with this kind of legendary wrestling family in New York, the Paddock family, where most of the Western New York wrestlers would go, who were kind of at the top tier. And that first practice, I don't think I scored a single point the entire practice. And as close as you can get to literal, I got my butt kicked. And I was driving home with my dad after that practice on that Sunday, and it was completely quiet. And we finally got back to the house, and in the driveway, I looked at him and I said, "Dad, I never want to go back." I felt stupid. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I had never wrestled a day in my life. And he looked at me and he said, "Zach, I know it must be tough to be a beginner again, but I want you to go back at least once. And if you still feel the same way, then I won't push you to keep going." And so I went back, and I went back again, and I kept going until it became routine. And I'll never forget, at the state tournament that year, there's a big banner hanging up that said the Sunday Kids. We practiced every Sunday. And it had Ian Paddock, Mike Devinger, all the big names, and my name as well. And just the sense of pride that I had. And really what I took from it was the importance of embracing discomfort, diving into things that are just outside the boundaries of what we think we're ready for. And I'm so grateful to my dad for that moment. And I don't know if it would have given me the courage to go off to San Francisco and to something new and to start my own company, or even to be in front of you all today. So that's an example of a meaningful moment in my life. We'll take just about 2 minutes here. On your own time, if you have pen and paper or on your computer, go ahead and jot down just a couple of moments in your own life, and then we'll talk about a couple of those moments and how to use those to come up with questions for others. So another minute or so, and then we'll come back. We have about 40 more seconds. All right. Keep writing if you want, but I'm curious to hear one or two stories of meaningful moments that people put down. If anyone would like to volunteer.
For me, growing up on Joseph Avenue with all the different people that lived there at that time, it's not as diversified now. But when I lived there, there were people from almost every group. There were no Asians, but other than that, we had almost every other group. And I think that has influenced me the rest of my life.
How so, do you think?
Well, I learned that you can't judge people by the group that they belong to, by their economics and the outside things that they present, whether they're well-dressed. You know, as a teenager, that was important to me. How much education they have. And so I learned to judge people as individuals and to accept them because they were my neighbors and they were my friends. It didn't matter what group they belonged to. And then the second thing that I had was about education and niceties of life. My father had to drop out of school when he was 14, but he read encyclopedias from page 1 to volume 13, the last page there. He was one of the most educated people I ever knew, even though he dropped out of school at 14. My mother only went up to 3rd grade with writing letters to the editor. So my Joseph Avenue and growing up experience helped me understand that it's the depth of character and the relationship that you have rather than all the outside things.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially as you're saying, coming from as diverse an area as Joseph Avenue, yeah, that was impactful for you. And thank you for sharing. What, curious, maybe one other moment that someone might share.
I think for me, a meaningful moment was, well, it led to a series of meaningful things. My connection to Israel, because my father was Israeli, and then our first trip to Israel as a family when I was very, very young, and then subsequent trips with family, and then on my own when I went after high school. And then going back with Ira after like 20-something years, after having not been there. And then ultimately my oldest son moving to Israel and then being in Israel to visit him. So it's been a meaningful thread in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So going to Israel was something that was an impactful experience for you. Yeah. So I'm curious, and again, thank you for sharing that, Daphne, and to Sheila. And it was, courageous or brave to share, the moments that have been impactful for you. I'm curious for anyone else who is listening to Sheila or to Daphne share their stories, what questions, if they hadn't just volunteered those stories, what questions might be some example questions that one of us could have asked that those stories would have been the natural answers to? I know one for me, as Sheila was talking, was thinking about how did your neighborhood shape who you are? How did your neighborhood growing up? Or tell me about the neighborhood you grew up in. Was it diverse? How so? For Daphne, certainly questions that came to mind were, what places have you traveled to that had an influence on you? Who did you meet as a result of your travels that influenced your life? These were some of the questions that came to my mind. I'm curious if there, for the other moments that you all have written down for yourself, and this was the strategy that I used, was when I first came up with the moments that I wanted to share with my parents, what I did is after I had written them all down, I thought to myself, well, what questions would my parents, or could my parents ask me that would allow me to feel comfortable sharing these stories, and that those stories would be the natural answers to. And so what we would do is, once I came up with those questions, I would choose 3 potential questions every week, and I would send those to my parents, and we would pick one. And we would all discuss those. We would take about a week to reflect on it and what we wanted to share. and then we would all answer. And I already knew, I had done the homework. That was part of what made me comfortable sharing with them things that I hadn't shared before, was that I had already reflected on what I wanted to share. And I knew then, because they would choose the question, that it was something meaningful to them too. So go ahead and let's take another 2 minutes right now. And for any of the moments that you wrote down, start to write down questions that someone could ask you, the answer to which would be the meaningful moment that you shared. And there can be more than one question that may lead to that moment. So go ahead, let's take 2 more minutes and start to write down what those questions may be. And also during that 2 minutes, if you run out of thoughts about questions for those, think about someone else that you would want to get to know better, and just start writing down questions that you'd be interested to ask them. So we'll come back at 1:43, 2 minutes. All right, so just about maybe 20 more seconds here, and then we'll come back together. All right. I'm curious what questions folks came up with, and as you share some of those questions, I'll write them down here, and I can also make sure, if you're interested, to share out our kind of workshop question list. But would anyone like to share one or more of the questions that they came up with?
I'll do it.
Yeah, go for it, Jocelyn.
So I didn't take the time to do the last part and to share that out, but what I had done in my own was to answer 4 questions for myself, which is, what's my proudest moment, my saddest moment, my happiest moment in my life? And what's a moment that really, really tested my faith? And they weren't just moments, but they were experiences in each case. You know, what made me proudest, saddest, happiest, and what tested my faith?
Tested your faith, is that?
Yes, exactly.
Great, thank you. Other questions that people came up with?
I have one.
Yes,
Can you?
go for it, Debbie.
I'm not sure why my picture's not coming up. Because I'm looking at your computer screen, so I don't see the grid. But my question would be, what experience have you had that turned out different than you expected? And that was based on something that I really wanted to do, was work with kids, getting them to do creative writing. And I never could have expected how exhilarating and rewarding it would be. It was more wondering if they would get something out of it in advance, and it turned out to be very energizing.
Fantastic. Yeah. What experience have you had that turned out differently than you expected? And for you, it was working with kids for creative writing. Is that what you said? Fantastic. Yeah. Other questions?
So I'll share. It's kind of like a 2-part question. First is, tell me about your passions? And then as follow-up question, when you think of your life's passions, what moments led you to them?
Yeah. Great. Any other questions that anyone wants to volunteer?
Yeah, who were your role models growing up?
Fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is let's actually go ahead and we're going to enter into a breakout room. And so you'll be paired up with one other person. And what I'd like you to do is, again, kind of go through, if there were any questions that you wrote down that you didn't share with the group, go ahead and share some of those questions that you had written down with each other, just in the spirit of continuing to get more thoughts about things that you might use. And choose one question together that you both would like to answer. And then go ahead and just discuss that question for yourselves. And then we'll come back together and talk about what that experience was like. And then we'll wrap up. So we'll take about the next 8 minutes. So we'll go until 1:54. We'll come back, and then we'll have about 6 minutes to wrap up. So I am going to stop my screen share, and you'll find yourself in a breakout room in just a moment. And we'll come back at 1:54. So I'm curious to hear from the groups what the experience was like for you, and in summary, just things that you've taken away from our session here.
Well, one of the things that we had a conversation with, I was with Sheila and Zach, that we talked about influencers and people that were important to us. And Sheila and she knew my influencer, which was really kind of nice.
Yeah. Anything from, yeah, Debbie.
So Jocelyn and I talked about our mothers and also having our children not living near us or living near us. My question had been what have you learned from your parents that makes you feel more like a peer, like as you get older? So it was interesting to talk about that. But I really appreciate your approach, which is to think about what questions could elicit a good response, as opposed to feeling like you don't know how to get a good response. It takes a much more active role.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have something that's meaningful to you, then you can at least know that if you could come up with a question that would elicit that, there's a good chance that it may be just a reciprocal thing, that question could lead to something meaningful with someone else. Yeah. One thing I'll mention in closing is that to me, my dad had, for his career, had at one point been a trainer in assertiveness, and I always liked his definition of assertiveness, which was acting in a way that respects the rights and wishes of others and ourselves simultaneously. And so for me, kind of this process of self-reflection and getting to know other people's stories is also about assertiveness and about dialogue. And if we are to act in a way that's respectful of everyone in our community, the importance of really seeking to understand and to know their stories. And if we're a part of that process, that we can act together in a way that can respect the rights of not just ourselves, but others as well. And taking the time to do the self-reflection ensures that we can also stand up for ourselves and know what's important to us as well. So I'd like to close with that, and thank you all for your time and for sharing your stories and being vulnerable in doing so. And we'll send out a survey at the end of the whole summit for the session. So anything that you liked or that could be improved for another time. So thank you all.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Likewise.